So the phrase carceral technology has a little bit of a history for us as a group. It starts when we came together and we were just like this ragtag group of organizers working at the intersection of like surveillance and policing and technologies. And we were trying to figure out what exactly it was that we were confronting. And we had a suspicion when it came to words like surveillance or data driven or computational, because these words have an affinity with the exact technologists and state actors that were perpetrating the kind of violence that we were trying to undo. So we had to start at a very basic level and ask, like, what is a technology to us, right? What exactly is it that we're trying to campaign against and build safety against? And what we started to realize is that the kind of violence that we're seeing in 2021 resembles the kinds of violence that the carceral state or the police state has enacted throughout history against marginalized communities. And a lot of this violence, which is administrative in nature, which is extremely bureaucratic, which is coded in legal discourse, but it's fundamentally like experimental programs, right? In which like we don't know what the impacts are going to be, but we have these communities that we need to somehow control, and so we're going to roll out surveillance systems and experiment on them. These kinds of programs have existed for a very, very long time, and the benefit of thinking of our work in relation to carceral systems is that at the same time, communities have fought back against the rollout of these systems. So there's a lot we can learn from prior generations who fought against the rollout of these systems. So carceral technologies, as we understand it, are technologies that are bound up in the work of categorizing, identifying, and coercing and enacting violence against entire categories of people. And they can take the form of profiling systems that you can see, whether it's in the credit bureau in the private sector, or whether it's something that you're seeing in like predictive policing analytics that tries to identify criminals and criminalize through algorithms. And they're also, carceral technologies are also things like voice recognition that tries to automate and code the conversations that people are having with loved ones who are incarcerated and things like that in order to identify where there are threats and things like that. And so in that long history of carceral technologies, our work is to find spaces of liberation and to break down the rollout of these programs, a lot of which, as Brian pointed out, we don't know if they're going to work, but because these are vulnerable communities, that level of accountability doesn't exist in the system. And so these experiments are just rolled out willy-nilly, right? And then to hold states accountable and to demand reparations for this kind of experimentation, because a lot of money is being made by testing on these populations. And so when you bring in the prison, which is a really, really unique space of innovation because prisoners don't have a right to consent, you start to see that it's become this domain where technologies are constantly being beta tested, constantly, all different kinds of technologies. And it's one of the most pernicious examples of that kind of like ruthless experimentalism, where you're like, I don't even know if this is going to work, but I'm going to try it. I'm going to keep making it better here. And the impacts, no one's going to hear about it because it's happening behind closed walls. It doesn't even matter. And then I'm going to roll it out against the communities that will be able to make the least bit of complaint if something does go wrong. And then we're going to roll it out to the general population. And I think what we're starting to realize within our work with incarcerated folks who are inside is that oftentimes products that are meant for commercial use begin in prisons, right? So whether it's particular kinds of vision recognition that happens in like automated security systems and video systems, because there's like staffing problems or staffing shortages in prisons and things like that, that had always had an intent for eventual commercial rollout. And so you can start to track like the history of how this innovation began in prisons, where folks couldn't say no and they were subject to the security domain of the prisons, and eventually they make their way to your Instagram filter, right? And so that connection to these spaces made us realize that like right now, all of the private goods that we're consuming and enjoying have roots in places that have a lot of violence endemic to them, right? And recognizing that connectivity is really, really fundamental to confronting what's happening right now around us before we reach that point where things are completely out of control, like Brian was saying.